In 1826, a 4-year-old little boy named Michael was killed by drowning in Kerry, Ireland. It was believed by some in his community that he was a changeling and that the act of drowning would cure him. Michael couldn't walk or talk, so this led some to believe that he had been quote-unquote fairy struck and was a changeling. Anne Roche, an elderly woman who claimed to have supernatural and healing abilities, had ordered 2 people to bathe Michael in the Flesk River every morning for 3 mornings straight. On the 3rd morning, he was held under the water for a longer period of time than usual, and he passed away. She was indicted for his murder, tried and found not guilty. Also in Ireland, around 1850, a father roasted his child to death because he thought it was a changeling. He was found insane. The belief in the existence of fairies and changelings was great, and it was so great that when something went wrong, it was because of a fairy. Fairies were blamed for bad crops, tuberculosis, and even birth deformities. Now, what is a changeling? A changeling is a fairy that has been left in the place of a human child that has been stolen by fairies. When it comes to changelings, usually it's a child that has been taken from the family, but occasionally adults are taken as well. The changeling, quote-unquote, child isn't usually a child at all. It just takes on the appearance of one. So how do you know if a child is a changeling? What are some of the telltale signs? It's said that they are always unhappy and mean. They may be very cold and standoffish, and the baby's appetites are never satiated. There's one way that is always supposed to make a changeling reveal itself, and that is placing it over the fire. Multiple children and adults with illnesses or deformities have been abused or killed because it was believed that they were a changeling. The reasons why the human child is taken isn't exactly known, but a few of the reasons I've read is to have them work as a servant, to receive the love of a human child, or malice and revenge. However, fairies don't typically take just any child. Usually, they choose children that have the traits that they prefer and admire, like blonde hair and light eyes. Sometimes they don't even leave one of their own. They leave a lump of wood or a bundle of twigs instead. And through magic, the wood is made to look like a child that will eventually become sick and die. According to Irish folklore, fairies were a godlike race that ruled ancient Ireland and were immune to aging and sickness, and they had magical powers. They were also able to control the weather and shapeshift. The word fairy encompasses a wide range of mythical creatures. Guardian fairies like brownies and hobgoblins are helpful around the house, while others were vindictive and would destroy property, abduct loved ones, or even kill. When the belief in fairies was the strongest, most people didn't even like to mention them by name, so they would call them the little people or the hidden people. According to tradition, you simply do not annoy or upset the fairies. You are to respect them. In Scotland, the Bavenshi were blood-sucking fairies who preyed on travelers, pilgrims, and hunters one night a year. They usually appeared as a beautiful young woman in a long green dress that would conceal the deer hooves that she had instead of feet. They were particularly attracted to the smell of animal blood on the male hunter's clothes. There's also banshees, and they are fairies that usually only appear before a tragedy. Mermaids, mermen, and river spirits are the most common nature fairies. When it comes to fairy forts, there are around 40,000 or more that remain, and they were built sometime between the Bronze Age and the year 1000 BC. In Ireland, ring forts, for the most part, have remained untouched for centuries because they were believed to be the homes of the fairies. The forts were originally created to keep the livestock in and the predators out, but over time they've become intertwined with the supernatural. Now let's talk about Bridget Cleary, the topic of today's video. Bridget lived either on top of or near one of these ring forts, and that was considered bad luck. In 1895, the disturbing true story of her death became a part of Irish folklore. Bridget was born in 1869 in Tipperary, Ireland, and as an adult, she was described as intelligent, beautiful, and independent. She wasn't like most of the women in her village. She earned extra money by making dresses and hats, and she also sold eggs. In August of 1887, Bridget married Michael Cleary, and they moved into a comfortable cottage near her family. Neighbors assumed that they had a happy marriage. On Monday, March the 4th, in 1895, when Bridget was 26, she became ill. Earlier in the day, she had been delivering eggs near the site of a fairy ring, and snow had fallen the day before. Once she returned home from her walk, she couldn't seem to get warm. The next day, she was shivering and complaining of a raging pain in her head. She was running a fever, and Michael told her she didn't look like herself. As the days went by and she didn't improve, her father walked 4 miles in the rain to reach the doctor, but the doctor wasn't able to come until the following Wednesday. So after the doctor's visit, a priest also visited, but he wasn't really that concerned. But he did administer last rites just in case she got worse. The doctor diagnosed Bridget with nervous excitement and slight bronchitis. But as time went on and Bridget wasn't getting any better, Michael became really worried about his wife, so he began to believe there was a supernatural cause for her illness. On the 5th day, his friend Jack Dunn, who was well versed in fairy mythology, recommended that he contact Dennis Gainey, who was a quote-unquote fairy doctor. Gainey supposedly confirmed that Bridget was a changeling and that the real Bridget had been taken to be a consort or a slave. He told Michael that if he didn't act immediately, the real Bridget would be lost forever. So, in an effort to try to get the fairy out, she was forced to eat several pieces of bread and swallow a bitter concoction that was made of fresh herbs boiled in milk. When she refused to eat or drink, Michael could be heard by witnesses outside of the house yelling at Bridget, "Take it, you witch, or I will kill you." She was also held down by 3 of her male cousins, and the liquid that she didn't want to drink was forced down her throat. One of the men even kept his hand over her mouth while the other sprinkled her with urine while they were yelling, "Away with you, come home, Bridget Boland, in the name of God." Relatives and neighbors both inside and outside of the house heard her screams, but they were too afraid to get involved. By midnight on Thursday, the ritual appeared to be successful, and on Friday, March the 15th, for the first time in 11 days, Bridget got out of bed. Things appeared to be getting back to normal, so several family members met at their cottage for tea later in the day. But unfortunately, things were about to get much worse. Bridget had asked for something as innocent as milk, but because fairies are known to love fresh milk, Michael lost his mind. Again, he forced her to eat 3 pieces of bread and jam, and he asked her 3 times if she was Bridget Boland, the wife of Michael Cleary, in the name of God. She answered twice and ate 2 pieces of bread, but when she hesitated with the 3rd, Michael threw her on the ground, hit her in the chest with his knee, and forced the 3rd piece of bread down her throat. Then he started to tear off her clothes, leaving her in nothing but her chemise. Next, he grabbed a hot poker from the fire and he held it close to her mouth. He pushed her head against the floor, poured paraffin lamp oil on her, and set her chemise on fire. Relatives yelled and begged for Michael to put out the flames and that he was burning his wife, but he replied with, "She's not my wife." Once the flames had died down, Michael wrapped her body in a sheet and he shoved it in an old bag. Then he left the house and he locked Bridget's relatives inside of that house with her body. About an hour later, he returned with a knife and he threatened to kill Bridget's cousin, Patrick Kennedy, if he didn't help him bury her body. So he yelled at Patrick to come outside right now because he had the hole nearly finished. They then carried her body about a mile from the cottage and buried it in a shallow grave. Meanwhile, back at the cottage, Michael made the rest of the family swear that they wouldn't tell the police. The next morning, Michael was in church, sobbing, tearing at his hair, and asking to go to confession. Jack Dunn, his friend, was with him, and he told the priest that Michael told him that he had burned his wife the night before. The priest then reported the conversation to police. For 3 nights straight, Michael waited at the ring fort where he said Bridget would appear to him riding on a white horse. On Wednesday, March the 20th in 1895, the Royal Irish Constables issued arrest warrants for 8 people, including Dennis Gainey, the fairy doctor. On Friday, March the 22nd, police found Bridget's body under some freshly cut thorn bushes and clay. Her spine and lower limbs were so badly burned that parts of her skeleton were exposed. The only thing that she had on was a stocking and 1 gold earring, and a sack had been placed over her head. Bridget's murder made international front-page news in 1895. Even the New York Times covered the story describing how Bridget Cleary was slowly roasted to death because she was, in her relatives' belief, bewitched. After a 2-day trial, Michael was found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced, along with Jack Dunn, Patrick Boland, and 4 of Bridget's cousins. The judge ruled out a verdict of murder because he believed that they all acted out of genuine belief. As part of the trial, the jury saw the inside of the storage building where Bridget's body was being held for burial. They saw the horrible suffering that she endured by the people that were supposed to love her and take care of her. The judge described the events that led up to Bridget's death as demonstrating a degree of darkness in the mind, not just of one person, but of several. A moral darkness, even religious darkness. He said, "It appears most incredible that there could be such a degree of human delusion that so many persons, young and old, men and women, could be so incapable of pity or sympathy with human suffering." He also said, the crimes of that night had spread a tale of horror and pity throughout the civilized world. In 1910, Michael was released after he served 15 years and he moved to Montreal. Jack Dunn served 3 years in prison. Bridget's funeral took place at night on a Wednesday. No civilian attended, and her body was transported in an ordinary car. She didn't even receive a funeral mass. She was buried in an unmarked grave in the Church of the Visitation. She's buried next to her mother, who is also in an unmarked grave. Bridget is sometimes known as the last witch burned in Ireland, and like Lizzie Borden and her axe, she too has a nursery rhyme that is sung by the local children. Are you a witch, or are you a fairy, or are you the wife of Michael Cleary?